Welcome to today's Explainer. We're diving into a fascinating mystery from the ancient world. We're going to track a deity whose very identity shifted dramatically right alongside the civilization that worshipped him. It's an incredible story of how human needs, shifting empires, and ancient literature completely transformed a single figure over thousands of years. So think about this. How exactly does a god of healing and farming end up becoming an empire's ultimate weapon of war? It sounds almost completely contradictory, right? But this is exactly what happened to the Mesopotamian god Ninurta. Okay, let's jump right in and unravel how one of the earliest attested deities in human history underwent such a radical, almost unbelievable transformation.
We're looking at a truly profound split personality here. Back in ancient Sumer, Ninurta was this nurturing figure. Think of the ultimate Sumerian farmer, deeply associated with the plow, healing the sick and releasing humans from the grip of demons. But you fast forward several centuries to the Assyrian Empire, and suddenly he's a bloodthirsty, fierce warrior god, wielding thunderbolts, celebrated primarily for war and hunting.
Section 1. God of Two Worlds. If we go all the way back to the earliest records from the 3rd millennium BC, his names really reflected those earthy, life-giving duties. He was known in Sumerian as Ninurta, which likely translates to Lord of Barley, and also Ninĝirsu, or Lord of Girsu, which was a local city-state. He was the son of the chief god Enlil, but his main gig was agriculture. He was the god you prayed to for a good harvest, and the healer you relied on to cure your family when they got sick. And his worship was incredibly practical. There's this poem called the Sumerian Georgica, written somewhere between 1700 and 1500 BC, where Ninurta literally delivers detailed advice to farmers. It was basically an ancient agricultural manual. It gave everyday people practical tips on how to prepare their fields, plant, harvest, and even how to drive birds away from their precious crops. To put his mythological standing into perspective, Babylonian astronomers actually associated Ninurta with the planet Saturn because of his profound agricultural roots. And he shares some really fascinating parallels with major deities you've probably heard of across other ancient traditions: Cronus for the Greeks, Saturn for the Romans, and Attar in the Canaanite tradition. Section 2. From plow to sword. But things change. As Mesopotamia grew heavily militarized under the aggressive Assyrian Empire, Ninurta's image got a massive overhaul. Assyrian kings basically co-opted him for their own state propaganda. In the 9th century BC, King Shalmaneser III carved these huge boasts of his military exploits into stone, and he boldly declared that without this newly militarized god's help, absolutely none of his brutal conquests would have been possible. They built huge temples for him in their capital, essentially shifting his entire domain from the farm to the battlefield. And this cultural integration went so much deeper than just building temples. Kings literally wove Ninurta's name right into their own identities to legitimize their rule. You get royal names like Tukulti Ninurta, which translates to the trusted one of Ninurta. By doing this, rulers embedded this fierce warrior god directly into the everyday military and political fabric of the empire.
Section 3. Ancient Mesopotamian superhero.
Now, Ninurta wasn't just some political mascot for kings. In their mythology, he was essentially the ancient equivalent of an action hero. To set the stage for his most famous battle, we first need to talk about the ultimate prize in Mesopotamian myth, the Tablet of Destinies. This was a sacred clay tablet belonging to the chief god Enlil, and whoever held it gained supreme authority over the entire universe. Naturally, as in any good myth, it gets stolen by a giant, monstrous bird named Anzu. What happens next is a wildly cinematic showdown. First, Anzu betrays Enlil and swipes the tablet right while the chief god is taking a bath. Ninurta steps up to confront the beast, fires his arrows, but Anzu uses the tablet to literally reverse time. He shatters Ninurta's arrows right in midair. It's literal time-bending magic. But showing some true superhero cleverness, Ninurta pivots. He summons the violent south wind to rip off the monster's wings, reclaims the tablet, and restores order to the cosmos. And Anzu wasn't even his only wild foe. In the slain heroes myth, Ninurta defeats a completely bizarre gallery of opponents. We're talking about a 6-headed wild ram, something called the Palm Tree King, a 7-headed serpent, and yes, even Kiliana the mermaid. What's absolutely fascinating here is that scholars think this exact story of successive outlandish trials might actually be the original source material for the famous Greek legend of the 12 labors of Heracles.
Section 4. The Biblical Nimrod Connection.
The ripples of Ninurta's legacy didn't just stop with the Greeks. They found their way into literature many of you might easily recognize today. Think about the parallels here. On one hand, Ninurta is this Assyrian warrior deity and hunter deeply associated with the ancient city of Kalhu. Then, in the book of Genesis, you have a figure named Nimrod, famously described as a mighty hunter and historically tied to the exact same ruins of Kalhu. Because they share so many of these core attributes, most scholars agree that Ninurta is actually the direct inspiration for the biblical Nimrod. So his cultural shadow is incredibly long, and honestly weirdly varied. Thanks to some early scribal eras, he appears as Nisroch in the biblical books of Isaiah and 2 Kings. By 1577, a Dutch demonologist took that misspelling and bizarrely listed him as the chief cook of hell. In 1667, he shows up as a frowning, heavily armored demon in John Milton's epic Paradise Lost. And then, amazingly, by 1906, he is summoned as an eagle-headed magical guide in Edith Nesbit's classic children's book, The Story of the Amulet. Talk about a crazy career change, right? From Sumerian farmer to English literature.
Section 5. Unearthing a Threatened Legacy.
Bringing the story abruptly into the modern era, Ninurta's physical legacy has faced both tragic destruction and incredible, ongoing rediscovery. Back in the 9th century BC, his worship peaked in the Assyrian capital, but heartbreakingly in 2016, extremists from ISIL deliberately demolished his ancient ziggurat in Kalhu. It was just a devastating loss to human heritage. Yet, archaeology is fighting back. In March 2020, a 5,000-year-old cultic area dedicated to him was discovered in Ninĝirsu. And just recently, in February 2023, the Temple of the White Thunderbird, his primary sanctuary, was finally identified.
During that amazing 2020 discovery, archaeologists unearthed over 300 broken ceremonial cups, bowls, and jars. Think about that for a second. Every single one of those 300 vessels represents a real ancient person making an offering. It's a vivid, tangible reminder of the everyday humans who lived, farmed, and ultimately worshipped this evolving god thousands of years ago.
Which leaves us with a final thought to ponder as we wrap up this explainer. If a god created thousands of years ago can still shape our history, influence our literature, and find himself in the crosshairs of our modern conflicts, what stories are we writing today that will outlast us? It's a real testament to the sheer immortality of the ideas, symbols, and myths we create. Thank you so much for exploring this incredible slice of history with us today.